a very happy International Nurses Day. I hope you've had a good day, and it's an absolute delight that so many of you have been able to join us this evening. I'm Kath McCourt, I'm the convener of the RCN Fellows, and I am just going to do a few sort of opening remarks. This is the first time in a series of conversations with nursing pioneers, and we thought about this following the publication of the compilation of nursing articles that we put together in October last year, and it was published by the Nursing Standard. And this is an opportunity for people to learn more about the fellows and for the fellows of the Royal College of Nursing to share their work and the impact that it has on nursing. You can find out more about the RCN Fellows on their website, and I would recommend that you have a look at it, and if you feel that you have the profile, that you submit an application form. My colleagues who've been involved in preparing this session this evening are Daniel Kelly, who was the one who first suggested that we did this, David Benton from the USA, who's one of our fellows, Alison Tierney, Jane Goad, Sarah Cheney from the library has been our absolute rock and our help all the way through this, and myself. And we hope that you will enjoy this evening, and as I say, that it'll be one of many more to come. So I'm absolutely delighted that we have so many people with us this evening. I'm sure it's going to be a really informative evening, and I'm very pleased that I can hand over to Christy Watson, who is going to be our host this evening, and I look forward to the rest of the evening together. So over to you, Christy. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and happy Nurses Day. I am delighted to be here. I am Christy Watson, and I am a nurse, a writer, and professor of medical humanities at UEA. I'm also the patron of the Royal College of Nursing, and very, very, very happy to have been working with theatre production companies for the last 3 years, producing a theatre show that puts nurses and nursing on stage, that's going live in the UK from next week. But that's enough about me, because we are here to hear from the most inspirational and inspiring nurses. 3 RCN Fellows who have been innovative and had a significant impact on nursing and healthcare, and I can't wait to find out more about their roles across health policy, research and practice. Welcome, Jane Ball, Ruth Oshikanlu and Tara Bartley. I would like to ask you all in turn, if that's okay, initially to introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about yourselves and about the contribution to nursing that you made that enabled you to become an RCN Fellow. And I will start, first of all, with Jane Ball, if that's all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christy. It's really wonderful to be here. So I'm Jane Ball. I'm a professor of nursing workforce policy at the University of Southampton, and my nursing research career started when I was doing a review, actually, of the literature on the costs and the benefits of nursing many years ago. And the aim of that review was, which was actually funded by the RCN, funnily enough, was to identify the research evidence on the value of nursing. And it was published way back in 1990. And so that was a time when there was a lot of pressure to reduce nursing skill mix, a lot of questions being asked from politicians and senior health managers to say, do we really need a nurse to be doing X or Y? So a lot of perhaps quite similar things that have been going on, as the years have carried on. But it was a time when, there was this doubting of what the value added of RNs was, and what the benefit of having a well-educated nursing workforce was. And looking back, I think it's that skepticism that's probably about the value of nursing input that's really kept me fired up and doing this kind of research on workforce and on the impact of nursing on patient outcomes for the last sort of 30 years. And it's what's also motivates me, I guess, in terms of communicating those findings. So for a big thing for me is I see that it's equally important to do research, but also at every opportunity I get to give people the message that nurse staffing is absolutely critical to the safety and the quality of care that's provided. So that's me.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing more about your thoughts about what's happened in the last year and whether things have changed. I'm sure they have in some ways. Can I ask Ruth, please, would you introduce yourself and let us know about your journey to becoming an RCN Fellow?
I'm Ruth Oshikanlu, and I was awarded the Fellowship of the RCN in 2017. Many things led me to getting the fellowship. Having been told early in my nursing career that I had to choose, I had to focus. And all this while I was thinking there's something wrong with me because I was interested in so many things. And then I found out I'm what people call a multi-potentialite, someone with many different interests and creative pursuits. So I thought, this is me. So I'm a nurse, I'm a midwife and a health visitor, passionate about reducing health inequalities and improving health outcomes, and often working on multiple projects at the same time. Throughout my career, I have enjoyed working with marginalized groups of people, underserved groups. Having lost 2 cousins to sickle cell disease, I started my career as in hematology, red cell hemoglobinopathies, and then later specialized in HIV midwifery. Then I worked at one of the Department of Health pilot sites supporting pregnant teenagers and teenage parents and their children. And since I left the NHS several years ago, I've been supporting women and their partners who have had assisted conception or previous pregnancy loss, because they're often another underserved group, to enjoy their pregnancy without fear. That journey from infertility to becoming parents is often a lonely and a painful journey. And I walk that journey with them using my expertise, but also supporting them to with their emotional and mental health. Having completed my master's degree in parental fetal attachment, I encourage expectant parents to form that relationship with their babies in utero, promoting their mental health and supporting them to reduce stress and anxiety. I also write a lot for publication, and I've written 2 books for parents. And I love to develop colleagues. I'm also a mentor and coach to many. So all of this work led me to getting the RCN Fellowship.
Wonderful, thank you. I've got so many questions already for both of you because it's such an introduction, and honestly I just love everything you both had to say. But finally, let's hear from Tara Bartley, and if you could just introduce yourself too, that would be great. Your mute's on, Tara. Great.
That's a good start, isn't it? Professionalism to the end. Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much, Christy, for the opportunity with the RCN to speak tonight. So I kind of feel a little bit of a fraud that I'm here under the auspices of a fellowship, which I was awarded in 2011, because along the way, the great and the good I've met have inspired me. But I would say that, equally importantly, I have had my family and my friends, from school friends all the way through, and many of my colleagues that have kind of built me into the person that I am and the nurse that I am today. So I've basically achieved my fellowship back in 2011 for the work that I've essentially done in cardiothoracic. So my area of expertise is around advanced practice, and it's around workforce. And then I've been able to look at how we can develop sort of innovative ways of working, extended roles, and long before they sort of became too topical. So I feel very privileged for having been able to do that. That's opened great doors for me. So getting the fellowship as well, I've been able to work with the Royal Colleges of Nursing, Medicine, Surgery, and also the Society for Cardiothoracic Surgery. And during my national roles with these organisations, I've been able to take an interest not only in workforce and advanced practice, but also in terms of education. I've had some insight and opportunities to contribute towards editorials and books and publications and peer reviews. But I suppose the thing that gives me the greatest pleasure is that for me to combine the roles that I have and still be very clinical, And then also to be able to watch faces as patients get better or patients have an understanding of what's going on. And then also my colleagues, as I see myself now in the position of, you know, developing them and watching them flourish into the excellent teams that I work with. So I currently work as a corporate lead in Brighton for advanced practice, and then I lead a cardiac team in University Hospitals Birmingham as well. So polarised country working and a lot of travelling, but a lot of opportunity to see people do well. So thank you.
Thank you all. I just feel so honoured to be talking to three such incredible women and incredible nurses and role models. I don't know when you get time to watch Below Deck or anything else trashy on Netflix that I'm watching, but you know, hopefully you do get some downtime. Okay, so let's get into the questions. And I'd like to ask Ruth Oshikanlu, if you would tell me about your experience of the pandemic. I think if we start right there, because we've all had very different experiences in our different roles. I'm really interested in the term frontline, because I think we're all frontline, whatever we've been doing. It's having a massive impact. So Ruth, if you could start and tell me how your role has changed during the pandemic, if it has, and what the experience has been like for the last year and a half for you.
It has been a challenging year because at the start of March 2020, I was so excited it was announced that 2020 was the year of the nurse and midwife. I had planned my diary to showcase the talent, our expertise as nurses and midwives. And I got back from the States having completed the first leg of my Churchill Fellowship, looking into trauma-informed approaches to care. Excited to speak at the Commonwealth Nurses and Midwives Conference. And then I returned to work with colleagues supporting health visiting. So I worked as a health visitor in North London. Unfortunately, that lasted only 2 weeks because whilst working, I contracted COVID and was very unwell for 6 weeks. At that same time, my uncle got it, died from it. So it was really, really a challenging time for the family. But whilst I was watching the TV, all I saw showcased were ICU nurses. It was very hospital-centric, and that angered me. ICU nurses are doing a fantastic job, but so were many other nurses and midwives. It's our year. Why just ICU nurses being showcased? So in that instant, I decided if the media does not showcase us, I will. And so last Nurses Day, exactly a year today, I created a video putting the challenge out there to colleagues to share their stories. And to date, I have recorded 375 interviews of nurses and midwives, different nurses and midwives, students, nursing associates. And it has been so, it's been beautiful, just showcasing my colleagues, how they have expended themselves in service during the pandemic, making a fantastic contribution to all the populations they served. Once I got better, because fertility clinics had closed, I decided that they still need support because fertility clinics weren't seen as an essential service. So I digitalized all my programs, ensuring that people had access to support, launched this virtual mamahood so that moms to be did not feel isolated. Because I'm also a member of the CNO BME advisory group, we realized that we needed to support colleagues, Black and minority ethnic colleagues, because it was so distressing. People were terrified to go to work. So many people that had lost colleagues. So I set up Carers Cafe, but I used that opportunity to progress some of the work I had done on my Churchill Travel Fellowship, applied for a COVID Action Fund, and was able to support frontline, I actually say frontline because we're all frontline, but those who are working and had seen so much loss, Black and Asian and other minority ethnic health and social care staff with culturally but also spiritually sensitive psychological support, because that was what they said was often lacking. I was also privileged to contribute to the Fellows piece, one of the 22 Fellows, and I'm very grateful to Danielle Kelly and Alison Tierney, who supported me to get that piece out of my head. Again, I've been doing a lot of work around vaccines as well, because we realized that the uptake of the vaccines was slower within our communities. So I've been doing a lot of work to promote vaccine confidence, but also writing for publication. So the Year of the Nurse, we got to celebrate, not the way we wanted to. COVID challenged us and we rose to that challenge. We were responsive, we innovated, we showcased our expertise, we focused on the populations we serve, embracing digital technology, but collaborating together. Without nurses, many more people would have died. And now we're so active in the mass vaccination program. So if you haven't celebrated, anyone listening, please give yourself a huge pat on the back.
I love that, Ruth. Thank you so much. My goodness, you really don't have time for Netflix binging, I tell you. But it's just awe-inspiring to listen to all that you've been involved with. And I definitely have lots of questions about Carers Cafe, but we've got so much to talk about. One of the things that I've been talking a lot about is that COVID has unveiled all the inequalities that were already there. They haven't just come about because of COVID, and of course they potentially could get worse. They likely will get worse, but actually those inequalities were always there. So in a way that could be seen as not a positive, that's not the right word, but something that we can desperately quickly learn from, because everyone's eyes are shined now. We know that's what's happening and we know what's out there. So I'm really interested to hear about the Carers Cafe, and I'll come back to that. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Tara now, would you tell us a bit about your experiences in the last year and 14 months, I think it is.
Thank you. And Ruth, yes, you echo an awful lot of my thoughts there, because I, in the first wave, was one of those nurses that was redeployed into intensive care. So I essentially, as I said, I work in two organisations, and they're very different, both from a cultural and an environmental and logistics point of view. And the Birmingham Hospital was kind of the epicentre of the COVID pandemic, and took over 5,000 patients across the sort of the two episodes, and certainly had the highest number of patients intubated from a European perspective. But then really interestingly, the numbers in Brighton were much smaller, but actually reflecting on the organisations as a whole, what was really apparent was that it was the same issues for everybody, and it really wasn't about numbers. It was about redeployment, breaking up teams, working in new environments. And this doesn't have to just be in intensive care, as I was in the first wave. So it's about the fact that everybody had to learn new skills, new networking, new communication. And I mean, if I just think back, I worked one shift that was probably one that could be remembered or could be put in a box for remembering later. But one of the poignant things that happened was that at the end of the shift, I was in the changing room changing, and the person next to me started talking to someone they recognised. And it was at that point I turned around and looked at the person and said, "Oh, hi, I'm Tara. We've just worked together in the same, looking after the same set of patients for the last 12.5 hours. And it's that whole lack of identity when you were, you know, gowned up looking glorious, as all the media shots showed. And it wasn't till then that, because of her voice, I recognised that that was who it was. So I think the thing that probably haunts me the most was people's eyes in that situation, staff coming in and clearly looking, you know, as if they maybe are going to have a panic attack, and just making eye contact and talking to them, and being able to transfer my skills back to all the intensive care work that I'd done in the past. So I've had the privilege of working in surgery, medicine, intensive care, transplantation, and that, I suppose, gave me that sort of network of being able to put my transferable skills in. But I suppose the other aspect really is, if you think about all that we can learn from this and how it really affected people, there's so many positives, and I think you're probably going to come to that later in the conversation. but certainly University Hospitals Birmingham have a collaborative that was established prior to COVID, but really came into its full own sort of fruition in terms of networking across Europe. And because of the hospital being the largest in Europe and being able to have side rooms and really good environment, we were able to establish green pathways, which I'm sure we'll come back to, but they were ways of looking at how we bring back the sort of the services that have been missing and the patients that haven't been able to be seen as they should have done in this, you know, during this time, and working out, you know, from major surgery to minor surgery, and how you know, threaten the flow of patients. So from my point of view, it's really interesting in terms of the inequalities for patients, inequalities of access, inequalities of ITU, and all these things, whether you're working in research, whether you're working at the sort of, you know, the clinical end of things, they're all issues that we found from networking and changing in our working practice and digging deep really amongst ourselves for perhaps elements of our personalities that can see us through this and support our colleagues on a day-to-day basis. I'll stop there because I'm sure you're going to come back with other questions, Christy.
I definitely will. I could talk to you three forever, so I'll have to keep an eye on the time. There is no magic money tree of nurses, and unfortunately one of the most significant challenges I think of this time has been the lack of nurses, or lack of critical care nurses certainly. And I'm going to hand over to you, Jane, because I know you've been pivotal in workforce planning. So can you tell us a bit about your experiences and how your job might have changed in the last 14 months as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I am at that very different spectrum, end of the spectrum. So compared to Ruth and Tara, so I'm at that sort of helicoptering out and then seeing the bigger picture in terms of how systems have been working and so on, and in particular workforce, as that's my specialist subject. So when I look back over the last year, for me, probably the biggest change, and it's very much what you were saying, Christie, is how some things have become really apparent. So COVID has really sort of acted like an amplifier for some of the existing problems, and potentially for some potential solutions that we maybe didn't see or hear so well. And that's definitely the case in terms of workforce issues. And right from the word go, as soon as the pandemic was looming, one of the very first things that we were talking about was, are we going to have enough staff? And the big risk was, of course, will the NHS be overwhelmed? And initially, I think perhaps the media and the public thought it was about how many ventilators, or potentially maybe more than just the media and the public. All of us thought maybe that's about how many beds. But actually what became apparent bit by bit is that a ventilator and a bed are hopeless and mean nothing if you haven't got the staff and the skilled staff with the right skills to use those things. So for me, I guess that's what's happened all the way through the pandemic, is that it's become so apparent that nursing and nursing workforce is absolutely critical to healthcare delivery. And if you haven't got the nurses, you can't deliver the care, and it's that simple. But it's actually taken this perhaps to make that very simple message really jump out at us and realize actually health services will literally collapse if you don't have the staff there to provide them. And then all through the pandemic, the different aspects of workforce management have just become very, very apparent. So we straight away started to have all those issues about whether staff were being sufficiently protected and had enough, you know, it feels like a long time ago now, but everything about PPE, about the pressures that staff are under. So for me, this has been a year full of evidence about how important it is to get decisions about workforce, about the numbers of them, the importance of their skills being deployed well, the importance of having adequate protection, of the length of shift, suddenly realizing that actually, you know, a 12-hour shift might work in some contexts, but when you've got to work with very, you know, restrictive PPE, that's a whole different thing to be wearing that for 12 hours potentially. So it's made very evident all these things. And So it's really brought the workforce issue to the forefront, and that's probably long overdue, given that we went into the pandemic with a national shortage of nurses. So it literally exposed that sort of deficit of nursing workforce that we've been kind of lumbering along with for some years, but it made it very apparent.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I wonder about moving on from that a little bit. One of the things that might have changed is the relationship or the identity of nursing and how other people from the outside perceive us as nurses. And I think a big part of that has actually come from medical doctors who have decided to go and be a critical care nurse for the day. We're all sort of nodding and smiling, because I think it's one of those jobs that can appear to be very simple from the outside until you're trying to do it and you understand the expertise, skill, the rigorous training and the academic work that goes into all those years of studying to become any type of nurse. And so I wonder from all of you really, or maybe I could pick up with Tara, whether you think the identity of nursing has changed throughout the pandemic, particularly thinking about perhaps the public and also other medical professionals and how they view nurses and nursing.
Thank you. Yes, I would very much welcome the opportunity to say that, because my current working is very much a sort of a multidisciplinary team approach, and across sort of my national roles and my day-to-day work, it's about collegiate working with a patient at the centre. And I definitely think that from a allied health professional and other professions, medical surgical colleagues, the network working that we had, where particularly there was a lot of learning from the first pandemic into the second wave, where people were working in ITUs and perhaps having an ITU nurse leading a team of allied health professionals and medical colleagues, and they were then the workforce. And I'm sure he won't mind me saying there's a colleague of mine that was on the local sort of press up in sort of the Middlesbrough area, and he was putting on a nursing uniform from the get-go, very much somebody who teaches with me and Joel Dunning. He was very keen to be taught and very receptive to learn and very keen to make sure that he contributed towards that workforce. And that's been echoed, I think, throughout our teams that I've worked with in Brighton. I can remember having a conversation with one of the consultants in the ITU. And then I think also as we've moved out of phase and trying to get restoration back in terms of services for patients, we've really had to think outside the box. We've had to think outside of traditional roles, and we've all had to work together to make sure that we can restart the in-house hospital treatments that we do for patients that have now become much sicker. And then that transcends into their families, looking after them both before and afterwards, and how sick they've got, and also our colleagues in the community who have been trying to look after these patients with long COVID, friends, family that have been looking after patients, friends, family that have had nurses or people they know working. And then, the research and sort of audit side of the UHB collaborative, and looking at how, the evidence will change the way we do things. So, and I suppose the other bit is the general public and what it's felt to have them see us in a very different light to the one we've had in recent years. And we wouldn't welcome that opportunity in the way that it's come, but it certainly feels as if there's been a palpable shift in the way that we are part and parcel of what's happened. And at this point, I suppose it feels a little bit uneasy as well to think that we've got friends, family and others who've worked in supermarkets and lots of other service industries, and they faced exactly the same challenges as us, haven't necessarily from get-go had the support that we had in terms of the press and sort of public persona, but it has now sort of filtered through to open our eyes up to them and the protection or lack of protection that they've had. So that, we have to look at some positive aspects from all that's happened, really, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is no, I'm on the peripheries of nursing now and thinking about nursing very philosophically and in terms of art, but I have never been more proud to be a nurse than right now. And I can only imagine that's echoed throughout nursing, the creativity that's gone into this year, whatever role we're in, whatever we're doing, however we're doing it. It's been, the proudest year to be a nurse, because people have shown the colors of nursing, whatever they're doing, and the importance of it too. And I'm just thinking particularly, and I don't want to, it might be politically sensitive, so tell me if it is, Jane, but I wonder whether there is any legislation at this time where we are gaining so much public support about the importance of nursing, now that people can see that it's nurses at the forefront of this pandemic, it's nurses who've been saving lives and giving meaning to lives, it's nurses who are going to bear the weight of it long after we're talking today. Is there an opportunity here for changing legislation to do with workforce in terms of safe staffing, for example, 12.5% pay, for example? Is there anything on your wish list right now that we can all get behind and campaign for that would make your job as a workforce planner easier?
Oh, that's a big question. Absolutely, there is, and so I think you're exactly right in your point, Tara, about how this year is really, I think public perceptions have really shifted, and that so this is actually a really important time, because these windows, they don't stay open forever, do they? So you have to be kind of ready, and I think actually we are ready in many ways around issues to do with safe staffing. I mean, the RCN itself has been campaigning for years around issues of safe staffing, and all 4 countries have seen some movement in terms of stronger regulation and guidance on safe staffing. And actually just this week, the RCN's just published on Monday, Nursing Workforce Standards, which is a set of standards to really try and underpin safe and effective staffing in all 4 countries, regardless of what the specific legislation is. But I think I was thinking about, when you look at those, they're a brilliant set of standards, and when you look at them, there's quite a lot of detail there, which maybe means that some people, you might miss, because there's quite a lot in there, you can sometimes then, you don't get the strong point that comes out of it. But for me, the really important thing is that those standards and the detail there really make explicit what's needed to make sure, and it's not just about coming out with a single recommendation about a number or about staffing levels, it's all of the different interconnected parts that are needed to make sure that we end up with a workforce that is able to deliver care safely and effectively, not just so that patients get the benefit of that, but also so that nurses get the satisfaction of being able to do what we came into the job to do, which is to deliver care well. Because it's a vicious circle, and that's what we see in the research, that if nurses are having to have got unbearable workloads and pressures become too much, then of course we see higher sickness absence, more vacancies. So we end up seeing nurses leaving nursing. And then you've got the vicious cycle then of high vacancy rates, difficulty then filling them, and then we're putting more pressure on the existing workforce. So it's really important for the overall sort of longer term stability of the health system that we get a situation in which there's enough nurses to do work, as I say, so that not only are patients getting better outcomes, but nurses can get the satisfaction of not having to miss aspects of care, not having to compromise on what they're doing. So I think it's a really key time to be turning those standards that the RCN has set well, and that others have also, they're very similar to other guidance, but turning that to say, well, let's see the commitment to actually applying some of these things that make complete sense, but actually don't happen routinely. So nurses don't always get the time they need for their breaks. Very basic things like that are not always applied. So yeah, I think it's a good time for this.
Thank you so much. That's a really interesting and comprehensive answer. Thank you, Jane. To a difficult question, appreciate that. Ruth, I'll come to you. And I was very interested by what you said about, the nurses that have been out there that have been saving so many lives, and so many more lives would have been lost. We know that if it were not for nurses in all settings cobwebbing around the country, and that safety net of people that we don't hear about, the most vulnerable in our society, who are being looked after, not necessarily in intensive care, but actually out there in the communities. And I was just wondering if you can think of some opportunities now, post-pandemic. It feels like we have got an opportunity and a window where we can really reframe, reset, rethink about representation of community nursing, how we get that out in the media, how we really talk about the kinds of nursing that we don't see so much. I wondered if you had any thoughts with your health visitor, midwife, and your nursing head-on about how we really value every single kind of nursing, not just the one that perhaps the single image that we are presented with.
I think the best people to tell our stories is us. We often leave it to other people, the media, to showcase our talent. How about us? And even during the pandemic, when a lot of health visitors were redeployed, it's because people didn't even understand what health visitors did. If they did, they would realize, actually, this is when parents need the health visitor the most, because there's no family support because we're in the middle of a lockdown. And that's why my biggest learning has been from my colleagues, because often I'm in awe when I interview them. I'm like, oh, can you do that? Well, we're doing it. We're doing it during the pandemic. So the general nurses that set up drive-through immunization clinics to ensure babies and children continue to get their immunizations, keeping them safe. I'm like, wow, do you do that? They were doing that so that they didn't have to get the parents into a closed environment, an enclosed environment. They did it, and then it's just how it was done, just with similar to the COVID testing. Or is it the school nurses who continue to safeguard children despite the constraints of using virtual platforms to support children and young people, using those skills to know something isn't right? I don't think we need to continue with this consultation. I need to see this child alone, away from this environment, because it may not be safe. Then using text messaging service so that they are accessible to these children who may not have gained access to the school nurse. Or is it the occupational health nurse that continue to keep staff safe at work, developing services, support services for staff? Or health visitors using Attend Anywhere for those who could access digital services, and for those who couldn't, inviting them to COVID safe clinics so that they could get the support. Or the district nurses that continue to keep patients safe out of hospitals, delivering complex care, including end-of-life care to ensure patients had better deaths. Community mental health nurses that ensure people continue to get support at home, kept them out of hospitals. Inclusion specialist nurses. We all have a roof over our head, but what of all the homeless people who may have contracted COVID and died from it? Then the inclusion specialist nurses continue to work with homeless populations, including children and families, protecting them during the pandemic. And of course, we don't want to forget the nurse educators. During the pandemic, I know how challenging all of my training was, but I didn't have to do it during a pandemic. The nurse educators who quickly adapted all of their teaching to online platforms, and eventually when they were able to blend them with face-to-face so that they could still gain the clinical skills. Many have stressed that they would ensure that these innovations continue, and I hope so. But we must be speaking with the media to ensure that people get to hear about what we do. We must be writing for publication. Whatever medium, we must ensure we're on TV, ensuring people know what we do, and all the work we do behind the scenes gets visible, so that people, honestly, it's not just claps every Thursday, claps every day, and ensuring that we get remunerated properly for the work we do.
I love that, and I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I am very angered about, and have been angered about this whole year, is that there hasn't been a nurse on the SAGE advisory committee, which I still, even as I say the words, find shocking. And when you talked, Ruth, about the amount of lives that nurses have saved, which I totally agree with, I strongly believe that more lives would have been saved had a nurse been on the SAGE advisory committee, because to put modelling into practice requires someone who really understands the on-the-ground logistics, the nuances, the patient care, and that there has been no care home nurse, for example, on the SAGE advisory committee, or infection control nurse who has spent her career working on PPE. I find it chilling and shocking, and I guess all my anger at the moment is around that, because it feels to me like we know what we do, we know the value of what we do, and our patients know the value of what nurses do in all settings, and the public, with their claps and their support and their overwhelming support the last year, understand the importance and the significance of nursing, but it feels to me like the government does not. And there's a disconnect there, and I'm always trying to work out how can we make that translate to the next thing. I don't know if any of you have got any thoughts about that, and feel free not to comment. I can be probably more political, I'm freer. But I do find the SAGE, it does feel like we are still fighting that narrative that nurses are not experts, they're not scientists, they're not researchers. And I feel like that's about the single story of what nurses is that's presented to us from the outside. Jane, I don't know if you've got thoughts about that.
I would really agree with you, Christy. For me, especially when I think about last year, 2020 was Year of the Nurse. And one of the biggest sort of parts of the Nursing Now campaign has been about making sure that we've got that presence at the policy tables and in the senior positions and at those, you know, those most important advisory committees and groups. And it's not, it's easy for us, I think, as we're in a habit sometimes in the nursing profession to sort of almost blame ourselves for not pushing, someone put in the chat, not blowing our own trumpet and so on. But actually, sometimes there are structural barriers as well to these things. So it's not just nursing and whether we've been shouting loudly enough, but actually we really need to make a point to say that these where we should be, you know, to point out those places like the advisory group and so on. And at the beginning of lockdown, I found it, I noticed that Ruth May was as chief nurse was quite often on the podium, and I thought that was like, well, that is good to see her there. But I also noticed it didn't last throughout, so it was for whatever reason. So, but it was nice to see that there were moments where you think, oh, that's good to see nursing being properly, you know, that's absolutely right. But it does feel like there's still a long way to go before that becomes more the norm, whether it's on the Health Research Authority, and sort of that's you know, a body that's had a lack of nursing for many years as part of it. So decisions about what research we do and so on, not having any voice or from a nursing body. So I think it's absolutely, yeah, it's key.
Yeah, it feels like we didn't have a seat at the table, so we've all bought a chair, but we're just carrying the chair. So we need to put the chair down. And I'd imagine if I was a politician, I would absolutely jump at the chance for an expert like yourselves to be advising me. And so there's a trick being missed here. I wanted to move on a little bit. Sorry.
I was just going to add a sentence, because I completely concur with what Jane said, because it's not just having a seat at the table, but it's having a voice that's heard as well. And I know Dame Donna Kinnair is very keen, you know, sort of at pushing that agenda forward. And I think whether you're on a ward round, whether you're talking to a GP or some other sort of agency of care, or whether you're in the Houses of Parliament or whatever, you know, we look to Baroness Edmonton for all the work that she's done. But how many other people have got not only a seat at the table, but a voice that's heard? And then when it's heard, is it listened to? And then is it actioned? And you know, we did hear Ruth May, and she did, you know, do a very good job for us. But you know, we need to make sure that we are used to having challenges and challenging conversations, and that we stay on the agenda when we have them.
Totally agree. And the other thing is that we're not always going to agree as a profession all the time. And I think that worries us sometimes, because we're not always going to agree. And that's fine. We can have discussions behind closed doors about different ways to approach it. But nurses are phenomenal. This day of all days, we know that, we're celebrating that. I mean, it's just, it astonishes me how brilliant my nursing colleagues are across the board, across the spectrum, across the whole of the UK and across the world. I've been lucky enough to meet nurses from all over the world, and I'm constantly amazed by how skilled they are, how expert they are, how rigorously academic they are, and what great creative ideas they have for the nursing profession, but ultimately to help people's lives, and often the most vulnerable people. So it's actually, it's a joy to be a nurse. It's just about getting that joy out there and spreading the love as much as possible. I wanted to ask in that vein about inspirational nurses, and I certainly have met, including you three, the most incredible inspirational nurses. Many of the RCN Fellows I've been lucky enough to meet, and the Queen's nurses, but generally I've found inspirational nurses wherever I've worked, in every setting imaginable. And I've also found inspirational nurses on being the other side of the fence even more, because then you really get to see, as a patient or a relative, you really get to see the value of this thing that we're doing. So I wonder, Ruth, can I ask you first if you could tell us about a nurse who's inspired you, whether from history or contemporary or colleagues or whoever?
Okay, I wish I could stick to one, but I will try. One of the nurses that has really inspired me is Kofoworola Abeni Pratt, and she was a fellow. Often she's referred to as the African Nightingale, because she was a Nigerian nurse, and I relate so much to her story, especially as her father did not want her to become a nurse. It was the same with my dad. Growing up in Nigeria, my dad thought, nursing, what a waste of talent. You should go into medicine, because being a doctor is something of status. And I love my father a lot. And throughout my career, I have actually strived to prove to him that I am not just a nurse and do what Benny Pratt did. And in the year of the nurse and the midwife, I feel honored to have written an Oxford Dictionary of National Biography on her with the support of Teresa Doherty from the RCN Library and Heritage Centre, and it is due for publication in October later this year. But what I loved about her is that what she learned, she took back to Nigeria to develop nursing back home, and has left a legacy for so many nurses. And you know, there's so many. I'm Nigerian, so all the Nigerian fellows, especially the women, they've all been inspirational. Dame Elizabeth Anil is Nigerian, Professor Uduak Achibong, you know, Nigerian. So when I got made a fellow in 2017, the privilege of sitting with them, thinking like, Lord, you people are those I look up to, and I'm sitting next to you. I'm really following in their footsteps and sitting, you know, on the shoulder of so many giants that have made it easier for me to make a difference within the profession and to follow in that path that they have set.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to reading this book and the other. Amazing. Jane, can I come to you and ask about any inspiring nurses that you can think of that we can celebrate today?
Yeah, I mean, like Ruth, it's really hard to just limit it to a nurse, isn't it? Because there's just so many. And actually, you know, looking down that list of the RCN Fellows, there's been, as you say, Ruth, there's been so many people who have made what's happened since possible. So in my list, and it is a list, I'm afraid I can't limit it, but it's people like, and you mentioned actually already, Audrey Emerton, people like Professor Jenny Hunt, Amory Rafferty, who I've had the privilege of working for the last 20 years on nurse staffing type issues, and obviously is now president, but also Senga Bond, Tony Butterworth, Jill MacLeod-Clark, and I was trying to think, what is it about the people who come up to the top for me as sort of favorites, as it were, or favorite inspirations, and I think it's the fact that probably across that list they've all had connection with research, or at least, or if not directly research, then it's also very much about understanding the importance of evidence to changing practice, and that feels just like what the RCN Fellows are all about. It's that importance of using evidence to drive changes in practice, and also a willingness to challenge the status quo. I think there's a lot of bravery in that list. A lot of people who have been willing to rock the boat. Jane Salvage is another one that I absolutely, you know, so inspirational in terms of how she's made us think twice about the politics of nursing and, you know, the genderedness potentially of the profession. And so, yeah, it's that willingness to challenge and change the status quo, and to really, that determination to make sure that the value of nursing is fully understood in their different parts. So with Audrey Emerton in the House of Lords, or, you know, in different places, those people have pushed out that message and used their opportunities to really do that in their different areas. So yeah, some amazing people.
It's just lovely hearing about these inspirational and amazing and incredible nurses. And I'm going to move on shortly to you, Tara, but I think some of the most inspirational members of the nursing profession that I've worked with have been healthcare assistants and student nurses. And I think it's very, you know, we talk about invisibility, and sometimes they're very invisible. Even during the last year, I just think student nurses and student midwives, imagine coming into the profession now, and what a challenge that must have been for so many of them, and how incredibly maturely people have dealt with it. And I look back to when I was a student and think, I don't think I would have coped at all well. And so many of these student nurses that have managed the last year in whatever they're doing, whether they're clinical or not, just becoming a nurse at this time just feels like such an inspiration to me that those people are carrying on. So Tara, can we hear about your inspiration?
Yes, certainly. So actually, I'm just going to pick up where Jane sort of started with Jane Savage. I can remember when I was writing one of the assignments in one of either my degree or my master's, and I took the poem from the beginning of the politics of nursing, actually, about the patient that was the relative that was told the patient had died, and the nurse went in and sort of, you know, cared for the relative. So Jane is on my list, obviously, and Audrey, as I've already mentioned. So, but if I take myself back to my first fellows meeting, and I walked in that room, and like you, Ruth, I sat there and I thought, oh my goodness, I am amongst the great and the good, and I don't belong. How did I get here? So I would like to extend a real love and a thanks to Jill Oliver, actually, who I sat near and had been sort of a very welcoming and loving person, really, and then went on to speak for me as at the national meeting that I organised for the Society of Cardiothoracic Surgery. And so she probably taught me, you know, the power of public speaking and of actually being human and being kind to people. I'd very much say that from digging back in my nursing years and my early development sort of and training, there was Cynthia Atwell, who I've now had the privilege to meet as a fellow again, and in awe, and Alison Tierney as well. And I think probably the other person who I've actually had the pleasure of meeting on the Fellows Forum, but along the way in my career was or is Dame Hilary Chapman as well. So for her, it's more, I've looked to her for her leadership and her achievements and the way in which she's done that. That whole thing around you sit with people that you think are great and good, and actually their human and their sensitivity and their kindness and nurturing that's made them not only the fantastic nurses and leaders that we have today, but the way in which they care for people is eminently obvious, and the way in which they care for people around them as well as patients. So, and I suppose, not wanting to be sycophantic, but I'm going to actually quote Kath in all this list as well, because Kath's way of speaking to people is absolutely exemplary. You know, she clearly values what people say. She is interested, and she she is a listener, and when you're looking at leaders to inspire you, you can think too, as you say, people that you've worked with along the way, and friends and family, and all the things that you take, and sometimes things you think, perhaps I won't take that element, but I'll learn from it, from individuals that you meet in your career. And then you see, you know, people recognised with this award, which, you know, is not to be underestimated, but still feels as if other people got us here to get it, really, and that we are very privileged and very, very grateful. But all these people have had a massive impact on me personally, but also what they've done for the profession and what they've done therefore for patients is massive. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for that reflection. I wonder if we can talk very briefly, because I'm very aware of time now. I'm not very good at keeping to time, but if we can talk very briefly about compassionate leadership, because one of the things that obviously all of us are very concerned about coming out of this time is that nurses have given their all and there is nothing left often, and people are exhausted and sometimes traumatized, and people are suffering now their own suffering because they've taken on so much other suffering as well. And I wonder if there are any practical things that you think perhaps people can do in terms of compassion, compassionate leadership for your teams, in terms of wellness, well-being. How do we support each other? And I wonder, Tara, if I could come straight back to you for that first, please.
Yes, by all means. So I sit here today immensely proud of the people that I've worked with, and my team at Birmingham and my teams at Brighton. You know, they outstrip us and they do us huge credit. So I think it comes from sort of everybody. It comes from listening to people from all the different spectrums across the health side of things. At Brighton, they have changed the whole appraisal system. They now have a welfare appraisal at the moment rather than the normal appraisal that you would have, and that has taken account of, you know, the recovery that everybody is needed really for this. And I think it's challenging, isn't it? But you know, I'm a half full person, and the things that I would look at are the things that I have learned and the things that those around me have taught me. You know, we've developed new assessment tools for patients. We have looked at different medications and their roles. We've looked at whole new ways of working and embedded in that both the human and the financial and logistical workforce challenges and new ways of working with technology, but also in the way we talk to each other and the way we value each other. And the networking and support that you've got, both being sort of redeployed or in different forums where you've been able to sort of challenge and sort of discuss and heal and help and support, and sort of that whole other multidisciplinary communication that we're having with colleagues outside of nursing and within nursing. So when I was thinking about this, I think it's really, you know, you can reflect that all elements of sort of, I suppose, for want of a better word, our job description, you know, our research element, our training, our clinical, our sort of MDT and communication, they all build into leaders at whatever level, whether you're leaders of yourself, whether you're leaders of a team, and trying to sort of, I always think, treat others like you would like to be treated yourself. And, you know, kindness is the key quality. And, you know, there are times where we need to face challenges, but we have to do it in a way that is respectful and takes account of everybody, really. So.
Fantastic, thank you. And we are almost going over to questions, but just before we go over to questions, have you got an idea or a message or maybe a sentence, Tara, if I start with you, sort of finishing on from that, about the future of nursing? If you could have a very brief thought about where you see nursing going in the future, or where you hope nursing will go in the future.
A brief sentence from me, that's challenging. So I would like to capture all the wisdom and energy and excellence that we have seen when we've all dug deep this year and all the intercollegiate working amongst ourselves as nurses across all the spectrum. And then I would like to take that chair, and I would like to take my megaphone with that chair and sit in a room with the people that need to listen to what we have to say. And I would like to see that we were able to get a responsiveness, and that we were, as a united front, able to do what's right for our patients and what's right for all of ourselves as colleagues.
Apologies. That is fantastic. Thank you so much. And in the chat, I'm just going to come to you, Ruth and Jane, but in the chat, while we are making some closing remarks, if everyone can start thinking about questions that they'd like to ask the panel, then that would be very helpful. So if you can field your questions in the chat, and I will try. I'm trying to navigate this at the moment. I'm not doing too well. But anyway, so if I could come to you, Ruth, and ask you about any closing thoughts you have about the future of nursing, but also I wonder if there is something, a piece of advice that you would give to yourself on your very first day in nursing school, looking back.
I wanted to start first by remembering all the nurses we've lost in the last year, because we never want to forget them. They died selflessly serving. And for others who didn't die, a lot of nurses are still struggling with long COVID. We must remember them too. And I wish them a full recovery. I'm going back to when I started. I actually didn't know what I was going to get from nursing, but just thought, you know, I need to trust the process and enjoy the journey. Joy is a big thing for me. If I don't love what I do, then I don't enjoy it. So for anyone starting out, be open-minded. Enjoy the journey, ask for help. There will be challenges. It's not an easy road, but the beauty of nursing is that the scope is vast. So just keep tasting until you find that dish for you. And you know what? You don't have to stick at one dish. I love to have little buffets. And I suppose I have created my career that way. So I have a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of this. So if you're multi-potentialite, you know, all the time my feedback was, Ruth lacks focus. Ruth lacks focus. Ruth lacks focus. I don't lack focus. I just want to focus on several things. And I love doing that. And as soon as I realized there was no problem with me, I immersed myself in service, you know, being with people, understanding their lived experience and making a difference. And often the difference, the impact we have, we never see it. You know, years after, we know we've made that difference. So just enjoy the journey, immerse yourself in it, and you will make lifelong friends, which is what I have done. Or, you know, I've found my family within nursing.
Oh, that's really wonderful. And I think you've answered one of the questions, which is what advice would you give a nurse starting out now? So I think that's brilliant advice. And you can have a portfolio career in nursing. Like you said, nursing is a language with many different accents. Certainly you can be a social media nurse now, a nurse writer, an entrepreneur. You could be all sorts of things. So I think that is very, very good advice. And I wonder if you could give some closing remarks, Jane, and maybe some thoughts about what you hope for the future of nursing.
Yeah, I actually, in many ways, what I hope for the future in nursing is not for nursing to change radically. I think nursing is actually in a really good place, and we have so much. You know, a day like today, you realize just how much there is to celebrate about nursing today in 2021. But I think what does need to change is we need to be bolder, and meanwhile we also need policymakers and decision makers and governments to change, to properly harness the full potential of nursing and the full potential of nurses. And it's so evident in this kind of event how much, and you're talking to different people, like you were saying, Ruth, and when you're talking about your colleagues, Tara, so much going on out there, and there's so much to be inspired by, but we are let down by not having enough resources in different ways, and not having enough specifically investment in making sure that we have enough nurses in the workforce. So we've had, you know, almost a decade of a shortage of nurses, and that's just unforgivable that we have carried on trying to kind of work on goodwill of nurses working beyond their shifts ending and so on in order to fill the gaps. And that's what I would like to change. So not so much about nurses and what they're doing, but actually, if anything, just to ask for more. Yeah, be bold. Yeah,
I totally agree, and I think that we all agree with that. Essentially, yeah, and it's about that moment of opportunity, I think, that we've got right now, where we're all shouting very loudly, we've all got very loud voices, and that now includes the public banging of pots too. So it's about translating those voices into effecting change and action. Tara, I wanted to ask you this question about that's come in about how we can retain what people have learned from this year and any additional skills that they have managed to pick up over the year. What I guess they're getting at is that we don't want to necessarily go back to how it was before, because we found some great opportunities and some great things along with all the terrible traumatic things too. And I wonder if you've got any ideas about how we can keep, I hate to use the word agile, I hate these words about, you know, blue sky thinking, agile workforce, la la la, but how we can remain agile is what I'm wondering.
So it's, yeah, I mean, it's not, in my book, it's not blue sky thinking. It's, you know, it's actually valuing and listening to people. I often quote that the importance of working in a team, and I can remember being in a cardiac arrest, and the person that saved the patient's life was my colleague who was a support worker, who showed me the oxygen tubing wasn't connected to the oxygen. And, you know, we could have been as brilliant as we wanted, but that individual saved that patient's life. And that whole lesson for making sure that you listen to people and you make time to listen to them, you know, there's nothing about hierarchy that makes anybody have any better ideas than anyone else. And then I think for me, in my role as a leader, it's about opening those doors. So it's about allowing people with those ideas, or allowing people to have time to have ideas, to bring them to fruition. So whether that's, you know, on our day-to-day sort of professional work, allowing a patient to have, you know, some form of change for what they want in their management plan, whether it's creating access for someone to go on an educational course or a learning opportunity, and then allowing them to come back and hear what they've had to say, to share that, and then finding the resources to bring those ideas to life, really. And I very much see, as I kind of reach towards, you know, the end of my career, that as much as I can do to open doors and share both my experiences, but also the resources that I've developed in terms of my individual tenacity and those sorts of aspects, but also educational resources and networking with people. I had a message today from someone, please can they put me in touch with somebody else? And, you know, so there was a message from Health Education England about sharing some documents on 360 feedback from patients. So you pop it on as an attachment, and then it's shared with 50 people, you know, so yeah, that will create change the next day, kind of thing. So I suppose I'm babbling, but listening, hearing, and being responsive.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I wonder, I had a job when I was a teenager in a market cafe. I digress, but one day, for some reason, I must have drunk a lot of Coca-Cola because I was being really, really efficient. And my co-worker who was cleaning the ovens with me said, don't be that efficient, because they will expect it all the time. And so I wonder, Jane, whether the danger of the level at which people have been working this year, and I'm thinking from a critical care perspective because that's my bread and butter, but in terms of ward staff as well, the nurse to patient ratios that have been just about acceptable because we're in a pandemic. I wonder about how we can prevent those as being seen as inspirational or aspirational or even just tolerable moving forwards, whether you've got ideas about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we are thinking about moving forward, there are the good bits, as you say, well, everyone's mentioned that's come from the pandemic, the innovations and changes, but there have also been changes that aren't best for patients or for nurses. So people cannot sustain working with those sorts of ratios day in, day out, and people cannot sustain. I mean, we're starting to see it's, you know, in the data that there's very clear evidence of the burden that is placing on staff and the knock-on effects. And so we can't expect people to be able to carry on working at that pace and that intensity day in and day out. And it's not just those individuals, those members of staff, that we do a disservice to if we do start thinking, well, they've managed with X, you know, for the last X months, so perhaps we'll just keep it at that, because obviously that has an effect on patient care. Each patient gets that many fewer minutes, whether it be in the community or on wards, if the nurses have a bigger caseload. But also it has that this burnout effect on nurses potentially, and we just can't afford to lose the nursing workforce that we've got, because we're already, you know, a long way off from the target that the government itself has set. So we know we need thousands more nurses, so we cannot afford to burn people out and let them leave. You know, people have hung on in there, I think, in this last year, giving it their all, and we can't abuse that goodwill, because it just isn't sustainable. So it's not even just about the ethics of it, or the whether it would be a kind thing to make people carry on working this way. It's just not sustainable. So yeah, our chickens will come home to roost if we don't look after the workforce. And we can't think that those emergency measures that were introduced as emergency measures are any way suitable as day-to-day measures going forward in terms of ratios.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that there will be lots of noise about recruitment at the moment. Whether those people will get onto courses, whether those people will get through the courses is another issue. But the bigger issue is retention. And it's particularly retention when we're thinking about role modeling, compassionate leadership, looking to those experienced colleagues that we know are such a vital part. And actually, I think burnout is a huge problem. It was a problem before the pandemic. And so we are in a dangerous space, I guess, with that in mind. One of the questions that's come in, which I'm really interested in actually, is a question that I've thought a lot about, because I was at the Nightingale for the first peak and I was part of the compassionate care team. And we worked with the chaplaincy from all denominations, who provided 24-hour chaplaincy support. And sometimes, for example, if the imam couldn't get in, the rabbi would sit with the patient and family or the nurse and pray with them or provide them some support. People of faith, people of no faith, they found it really, really helpful. And I think the staff found it really, really helpful during this really traumatic time. And one of the questions, Ruth, I was going to ask you, because of your culturally and spiritually comment earlier, is I think it's really, really important to have that. That's one of the learnings that we've come out with, is that we can have a capacity for spiritual support, however that looks, whether you are of faith or not. And I wondered how you might imagine that, or if you have any ideas about that moving forwards.
When I did the work, when we undertook the listening events as part of the CNOBME advisory group, what a lot of people said is that, yes, there was access to psychology services, but it wasn't culturally sensitive, it wasn't spiritually sensitive. Some questions were asked about what they had been through that somebody who understood their lived experience would not have asked, almost re-traumatizing them, having to repeat their stories. So whatever support is there, we must listen and then co-design and co-produce these services, but using a trauma-informed lens. You know, what has happened to you? What got you to where you are today? Why are you here to see me? And whatever is services are developed must be holistic. That's what we do with our clients or with our patients. We don't just focus on the physical. There's the emotional, there's the spiritual, there's the mental. But when it comes to nurses, we just give them physical, or just, you know, it's just basic stuff rather than supporting us to rebuild. There was a question there too about resilience. I don't think we should be encouraging just individual resilience. The systems must foster resilience. You know, we expected people to be stronger and stronger and stronger, and they get strong and strong, and then they burn out. They have their compassion fatigue. They can't give anymore. So I really do think in our daily practices, we must embed restorative supervision that allows you to restore. And it is a non-negotiable. I'm a believer of Pareto, the 80-20 rule. It's a non-negotiable. You know, if you have a car, you need petrol in the car to move the car. So this is a must. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity and must be a priority so that nurses can heal properly from what they've experienced and then better able to support the populations they serve.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think we're all nodding at that. It is absolutely vital that people look holistically at not just patients and relatives. We're very good looking after patients and relatives, but perhaps that's the next link, is that we need to be much better at looking after each other, ourselves, and understanding you know, the traumatic effects that can happen. And certainly I come from a resus background, and we did all sorts of things with what we call debriefing, which is actually psychologically now proven to be very harmful. So you do need those experts that are going to sensitively handle whatever's coming. And the word resilience for me, I absolutely hate. And I didn't used to hate that word. I thought that word was a great word before the pandemic. And then people started talking about, we need so much resilience. Well, you can't have resilience against a pandemic. And people don't necessarily want to talk about their experiences just yet. And we will need time to mourn, to reflect, to suffer in our own ways. And so I think we should scrap the word resilience from the Oxford English Dictionary and just talk about the fact that we are supportive, and we're supportive of ourselves and supportive of each other. And that's how we're going to manage our emotions and get through the next period. So I think we probably have time. Oh, we've got 1 minute. We've got 1 minute. So I'm going to pick a very, very quick question. I'm not very good at picking questions, I'm afraid. Okay. Let's talk about, okay, this is for Ruth. Do you know of any institutions that do supervision? I'm assuming they're talking about clinical supervision.
Yeah, there's so many institutions that do it. The Foundation of Nursing Studies also do this restorative supervision that uses a model. It's a fantastic model, and they offer training, so like a train the trainer. So you go. So I've been on it, and I used it with health visitors who were redeployed, and school nurse teams redeployed, and offered so many sessions so that they now get trained to develop it within their teams, and it becomes part of their daily, embedded in their daily practice, trauma-informed resilience, no, compassionate supervision.
Yeah.
So the focus is on the person. No. Compassionate.
Yeah. And clinical supervision is so important. I agree with you. I think all these things should be non-negotiable anymore. They're not soft skills. These are the hard skills. These are what we need. I'm going to hand over to Professor Danny Kelly, who I believe is lurking around in the background to talk to everybody. Am I right? Maybe not.
Hi, Christy.
Hi,
everyone.
hi. Hi, hello. Hi.
What a wonderful event. I've really enjoyed listening to you all. It's been a really marvelous expose of nursing expertise. Just a little bit about the background to this event. When I suggested it, it was really to allow the public to see what RCN Fellows are, what they've achieved, what they do, who they are, and to bring them to life, if you like, in an event like this. Because I think sometimes we can see a roll of honour, and some of us might know some of those names, but many of us may not. So this was the impetus. So I'm really grateful for you for taking part. We do plan to continue to interview and collect fellows' experiences, and we also intend to repeat this event, maybe do it twice per year, and to have a theme each time. This time we felt COVID was the most relevant issue that people would want to hear about. But we will move on, and the world will keep turning. And there are perennial issues that nurses have faced. And today we've heard of many challenges that lie ahead. So we have a wonderful archive in the RCN, and these are materials from people who are both alive and people who are now deceased. So we like to be able to, in the future, to go into that archive as well and tell some stories of fellows past. So it's a very rich history that we've got, and I hope that people who have attended today would like to come back and hear more about the wonderful achievements that nursing has made over the years. So that's enough from me. Thank you, Christy, and I'll pass back to you to close this evening's event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a really special event, and I can't imagine 3 more incredible, inspirational people to be honoured to chat to for a very short time. So thank you 3 for all that you do. Jane Ball, Ruth Oshikanlu, and Tara Bartley. I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you everybody else for joining us this evening and celebrating Nurses Day in this year of years. I cannot think of a more important job than being a nurse right now. So thank you all for joining in this celebration.